The fateful Tuesday in October 2014 became a tragic day for the Sullivan family. It was then, on October 14, that 32-year-old Elizabeth Sullivan vanished without a trace. The woman lived with her husband Matthew, a 29-year-old Navy veteran, and their two young daughters in a three-story house located in San Diego, California. Elizabeth and Matthew had met in the state of Virginia, where Elizabeth spent her childhood and Matthew was stationed for military service. A spark of love immediately ignited between the young couple, and soon their relationship blossomed into a passionate romance. It seemed that a happy life together awaited them. In 2010, Matthew proposed to Elizabeth, and they got married shortly after. When her husband was transferred to serve in San Diego, the couple moved there and purchased a cozy three-story house. Soon, Elizabeth became pregnant, which was joyous news for both of them. After the birth of their first daughter, Matthew took a leave of absence to help his wife care for the baby. Later, the couple had another daughter. From the outside, the Sullivan family seemed picture-perfect, loving and happy. So the news of Elizabeth's disappearance shocked everyone who knew them. The day before this event, on October 13, neighbors had seen Elizabeth near their house. That day, she sent several messages to her family and friends, and even spoke with them on the phone. But as evening approached, the situation changed. During a conversation with a friend from her hometown in Virginia, Elizabeth suddenly hung up. After that, she stopped responding to calls and messages, and her phone was turned off. This seemed strange, as the woman was usually always reachable. The next day, Matthew called 911 to report his wife missing. He mentioned some odd circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Allegedly, Elizabeth had withdrawn all the money from their joint bank account, left the house in disarray, and vanished. But, as it turned out, it was not him who first reported her missing, but Elizabeth's close friend. The woman had repeatedly tried to reach the missing woman, but she didn't answer. Then the friend tried to contact Matthew, but he wasn't picking up either. Worried, she called Elizabeth's parents, who also expressed concern about the situation. Eventually, on the morning of October 14, the friend, along with Elizabeth's relatives, called 911 themselves. The police launched a search for the young mother of two. A $1,000 reward was announced for information that would help find the woman and bring her home. Elizabeth's parents urgently flew to San Diego to join the search efforts. The family did not believe that Elizabeth would simply leave the house, abandoning her beloved children whom she adored, without telling anyone. Her close friend was also skeptical of Matthew's version of a voluntary escape. Everyone feared that something terrible had happened to Elizabeth. Matthew's behavior immediately raised suspicions among both the missing woman's family and law enforcement. The man gave conflicting explanations about the timing of his wife's disappearance and had no alibi. His tears seemed fake, and the idea of Elizabeth running away sounded absurd. All of the woman's belongings were left at home. How could she have left without her documents, clothes, or even her car? In addition to the police, volunteer squads, relatives, and friends of Elizabeth joined the search. But Matthew did not participate. He explained his absence from the search efforts by saying he needed to stay with the children, their 4-year-old older daughter and 2-year-old younger one. The missing woman's relatives offered to help him, but the man refused. He didn't even want to distribute flyers with his wife's photo to draw public attention to her search. Matthew's strange behavior made him the prime suspect in Elizabeth's disappearance. Detectives began to study the relationship between the Sullivan spouses in detail and learned some interesting facts. It turned out that the couple often quarreled. In recent months, the relationship had become so strained that the husband and wife were living on different floors of the house and barely communicating. Elizabeth had filed for divorce, which was under consideration. Matthew was against it, but the woman could no longer tolerate his aggression and mistreatment of her and the children. 6 months before her disappearance, in March 2014, she even called the police because of her husband's threats. At that time, Elizabeth told a former law enforcement officer about a long history of domestic violence in their family and expressed fears that things could get even worse, that Matthew might harm her. Elizabeth's relatives provided the investigators with another important piece of information. The woman had indeed been planning an escape from her tyrant husband. That's why she withdrew money from their account and packed suitcases. But she was going to flee not alone, but together with her daughters. She could not leave the children with Matthew. The husband was summoned to the police station for questioning about the family's relationship. Matthew confirmed that the marriage was falling apart and the couple was on the verge of divorce. But he considered it not serious, convinced that his wife just wanted to scare him with the legal process. In his opinion, Elizabeth had taken the money and run off with a lover, leaving him with the children. Supposedly, she was now having fun somewhere, and when the money ran out and problems began, she would return home. So he saw no point in searching, because, in his view, the woman was not in any danger. With Matthew's permission, the police conducted a cursory inspection of the Sullivan home but noticed nothing suspicious. No signs of a struggle, traces of outsiders breaking in, or bloodstains were found in the dwelling. Since there was no evidence against the husband or facts indicating Elizabeth had been kidnapped, the investigation was suspended and the search for the woman was halted. Law enforcement agreed with Matthew's version that his wife could have voluntarily left the family. This was supported by information that it was Elizabeth who had withdrawn all the funds from their joint bank account. Despite repeated appeals from Elizabeth's relatives, who insisted that she would never abandon her children and run away from home, the case went untouched for almost 2 years. The situation changed on October 6, 2016, when the body of a woman was found floating in the water in San Diego Bay, about a kilometer from the Sullivan home. The victim was in poor condition. Law enforcement quickly determined that the deceased had dark skin. They reviewed all the missing persons cases in the area and ordered an examination. The results were shocking. It turned out to be the body of Elizabeth Sullivan. The woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed. The medical examiner established that she had not been in the water the entire time. The body had been dumped in the bay relatively recently. Before that, it had apparently been stored elsewhere. There is reason to believe that for an extended period, Elizabeth was in a frozen state, and then, when the perpetrator decided to get rid of the body, he threw it into the water. He probably did not consider that it could float up and be found. The case of Elizabeth Sullivan's disappearance was reopened from the archives and reclassified as a murder investigation. However, no evidence could be found on the victim's body. The water had thoroughly washed away all possible traces. The main suspect again was Matthew, who categorically denied any involvement in the crime. The man suggested that Elizabeth had been killed by her lover, with whom she had allegedly run away. Perhaps the woman had gotten into trouble over a large sum of money. She could have been robbed or had her life taken to get rid of an unwanted witness. However, the nature of the crime indicated otherwise. Numerous stab wounds were found on Elizabeth's body. The force of the blows had broken her ribs, nose, and jaw. The attack was extremely violent, suggesting personal motives, likely related to jealousy. If it had been a regular robbery, the victim would have simply been shot. Here, some personal reason for the murder could be traced. As it turned out, shortly before the body was found, Matthew had moved with his children from Elizabeth and his new girlfriend, who had given birth to his child, to the state of Maryland. Detectives believed that the timing coincidence between the move and the appearance of the body in the bay was not accidental. Matthew had probably decided to dispose of the body precisely during the change of residence. It took the investigation another 1.5 years to gather evidence of Matthew's involvement in the murder. Eventually, an arrest warrant was issued for him in another state. It was revealed that during this time, the man had managed to change his place of residence once more. It seemed that the frequent moves were not accidental. Matthew was trying to escape from police pursuit. On January 31, 2018, he was arrested near his new home in Wilmington, Delaware, and then extradited to San Diego. There, he was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife. According to the investigation, the murder took place on the night of October 13 to 14, 2014. Matthew found out that Elizabeth had withdrawn money from their joint account and was having an affair. He assumed that his wife was going to run away from him. Upon discovering that she had already packed her things, her own and those of their 2 daughters, Matthew lost his temper. An argument broke out between the spouses, which had tragic consequences. Presumably, while Elizabeth was trying to call her relatives, Matthew beat her to death in the bedroom. The children were in the next room at the time. Matthew did not admit guilt and claimed that he was not involved in his wife's death. However, it turned out that during the initial inspection of the couple's residence, the police had missed something. In the attic of the house, in a hiding place, a bloody knife was found. Matthew's fingerprints and traces of DNA matching the genetic material of the deceased were discovered on it. When, after finding Elizabeth's body, law enforcement officers searched the house again, Matthew had already moved out. Dried bloodstains belonging to the victim were found under the carpet in the bedroom. Evidently, this was where the murder had taken place. In the basement, a suspicious freezer was found. Service dogs had sniffed out the odor of a corpse in it, suggesting that Elizabeth's body had been stored there for some time. At the time of the search, the freezer was already empty and thoroughly cleaned. During the court hearing, the prosecutor in the case drew the jurors' attention to the fact that the couple's passionate romance had later turned into domestic violence. Matthew began to be jealous of Elizabeth and use physical force against her. The situation escalated due to the woman's desire to divorce and run away with the children. It was this, in the prosecution's opinion, that led to the tragic denouement. The state prosecutor also provided details about the deceased's new romance. Elizabeth had met a man on an online dating site. At first, they just communicated, and then decided to meet in real life. Later, the couple began spending more time together. The new boyfriend even introduced Elizabeth to his friends. At that point, the woman did not tell him that she was in the process of divorce and had children. One day, Elizabeth's new lover's friend accidentally saw her on the street and noticed child car seats in her vehicle. He became alarmed that the woman might have left her children at home alone and reported the incident to Child Protective Services. They accepted the report and initiated an investigation. An email with an inquiry was sent to Elizabeth's email address. This message came to Matthew's attention, and that's how he found out about his wife's new romance. The prosecutor also emphasized that on the eve of the tragedy, October 13, Elizabeth had visited her lawyer, who was representing her interests in the divorce case, for the last time. This indicated the seriousness of her intentions. The next day, she was supposed to meet with him again but never showed up. After visiting the lawyer, the woman transferred money from the joint bank account with Matthew to her personal one. She also planned to obtain a restraining order against her husband in court but did not have time. During the hearing, the victim's friend testified. She said that Elizabeth had confided in her about her experiences and admitted that she and Matthew had gotten married too quickly, without fully sorting out their feelings. The marriage was a mistake. Elizabeth did not feel happy with her husband and had become disillusioned with him. And when he began to use physical violence against her, she realized it was the end. She would no longer tolerate it. According to the prosecution, on the morning of October 14, after his wife's disappearance, Matthew went to the Home Depot hardware store, where he purchased cleaning supplies, in particular for carpets. The prosecutor suggested that the man was washing away traces of the crime from the house. That is why, during the first inspection of the dwelling, law enforcement officers did not notice bloodstains under the carpet. Visually, the house seemed clean and tidy. Since they did not have a search warrant, the police only briefly examined the house with the owner's permission. But when they returned for a thorough check after Elizabeth's body was found, they did find small bloodstains under the carpet. The prosecution believes that after the murder, Matthew hid his wife's body in a freezer located in the basement. During the initial inspection, the police did not find it because the man did not even show them the basement, and they were unaware of its existence. The likely presence of the body in the freezer was indicated by the results of the service dog's work, as well as the conclusions of the medical examiner, who determined that the corpse had been in a frozen state for a long time. Matthew's lawyer insisted that the marriage had begun to fall apart back in 2012, and with each passing day, the relationship between the spouses only deteriorated. According to him, Matthew was a man who tried to keep the family together for the sake of the children and did not want a divorce. The defense accused Elizabeth of improper behavior and having an affair while still officially married to Matthew. At the same time, the husband had allegedly been trying to help her all along. The defendant claimed that Elizabeth was rapidly degrading. In addition to a lover, she was supposedly abusing alcohol and illegal substances. According to him, at times, his wife would not even spend the night at home, falling asleep on the lawn in front of the house and shaming their family in front of the neighbors. However, this information never found any confirmation. Neither relatives nor neighbors noticed anything like this in Elizabeth's behavior. The defense insisted that the bloodstains under the carpet appeared not as a result of murder but due to Elizabeth's attempt to take her own life. Allegedly, she had cut her wrists with a shard of broken glass after learning that Child Protective Services had initiated an investigation of the family. The woman was in complete despair, worrying that the children might be taken away. It was in this condition, bleeding, that Matthew supposedly found her. He provided first aid to his wife and begged her not to make any more. The man decided not to go to the doctors so as not to worsen his wife's already difficult situation and not to ruin both of their reputations with the guardianship authorities. The lawyer expressed the opinion that the knife found in the attic of the house was not the murder weapon. It had allegedly been hidden by Elizabeth herself, who often inflicted cuts on herself due to self-destructive behavior. Matthew confirmed that his wife had told him she would cut herself whenever she experienced severe stress. The defense attorney stated in court that shortly before the tragedy, Matthew had asked his mother and sister to temporarily move into their house to help care for the children and supervise his mentally unstable wife. She was categorically against the presence of outsiders in the home, and the couple had a serious fight over this, so Matthew had to postpone the idea of inviting his relatives. The lawyer also reported that his client had no problems with the law or criminal record. Matthew had served in the Navy for 8 years. His acquaintances characterized the man as a decent and conscientious person. However, the prosecution provided the results of an examination according to which the knife found in the attic was the weapon used to kill Elizabeth. The jury found Matthew guilty of second-degree murder. After the verdict was announced, Matthew made a statement. He expressed regret that the defense had not called witnesses to court whose testimony could have drastically changed the jury's decision. The prosecution insisted on life imprisonment, noting that the defendant showed no signs of remorse. Moreover, with his unfounded statements, he tried to tarnish his wife's memory and thereby justify himself, although all the evidence pointed to him as the killer. The court supported the prosecution's position and issued a ruling. The jury's verdict and the evidence provided during the hearing clearly proved that Matthew Sullivan had brutally taken the life of his wife, methodically cleaned up the crime scene, and hid the victim's body in a freezer for years. He narrowly escaped punishment. The perpetrator's last attempt to get rid of the body by dumping it in the bay failed. Otherwise, he probably would have remained unpunished. In March 2021, the judge sentenced Matthew to life imprisonment with the right to apply for early release no sooner than 16 years later. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.